Gutless losers. I say that to CNN because I watch it. I have no choice. I got to watch that garbage. It's all garbage. It's all fake news. But I think CNN is a gutless group of people. And the people that run it, nobody even knows it's been sold so many times. But the people that run it ought to be ashamed. MSDNC, a guy named Brian Roberts, he heads it. He's a disgrace. He's a weak, pathetic disgrace.
Israel says that Iran violated the peace agreement and the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that? Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Anybody in this country doesn't minimize their tax. They want their heads ring.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. The answer is Mike, because I want to do you slowly. I was saved by God to make America great again.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is watching this. And if you are watching this live, you can contribute by popping a comment or a question into the chat. And if you're really game, you can click that link to StreamYard, which is also hiding in the chat, and you can call in and have your say. We want to hear from you. It's always best when we have great audience participation, and we definitely want to hear from you, whether it be in the chat or by calling in. Now, let's kick things off because we've got a returning guest tonight, and we've got a lot to discuss. But I want to get you to head to commandingthenarrative.com. If you go there, you can hit the sign up button in the top right-hand corner, and commandingthenarrative.com is the best way for you to keep up to date with everything that we're doing, whether it be all the latest podcasts, any newsletters or articles that might be up there, and also upcoming events. If you want to know who's on the podcast this week, all that information is there at commandingthenarrative.com. And while you're at the website, also hit the donut button at the top there, and it will take you through to this page, which will give you a couple of options on how you can contribute to us, whether it's a direct method or through Buy Me a Coffee. It just helps us to keep everything going, helps to pay for the website, helps to pay for the streaming services, and most importantly, gives me a very warm and fuzzy feeling inside. So if you want to head to commandingthenarrative.com and follow all those prompts, please do so. It would be much appreciated. Also, please head to australiansforbetter.com. Now, Australians for Better Government, I've been talking about this since we launched it at the start of the year. We've got a great big event coming up on the Gold Coast. So if you're in the Gold Coast or close to the Gold Coast, it's this one here. It's on Sunday, August 3rd at the CSI Club Southport. It's going to be a great event. We've got our guest tonight, Dr. Christopher Reynolds, speaking, also Senator Malcolm Roberts and Senator Jared Rennick, along with Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Lockray and myself. It's going to be a great day. We had one of these events down in Sydney recently and had very, very positive feedback. So if you're on the Gold Coast, if you're in Brisbane, if you're down in the Tweed or in Ballina or somewhere close by, please get your tickets to this one. Come along and engage in some important discussions about the future of Australia and of our political system. Now, the other exciting thing about Australians for Better Government recently is the launch of our prospectus. So if you head to the website australiansforbetter.com, you'll come to the front page there. You can click on this. This is our new prospectus. It basically goes through what we're about, all the proposals that Australians for Better Government stands for, and what we really want to achieve. We want to send this out to everyone so they can learn about Australians for Better Government. So if you have an email list or you want to share it to some of your friends and family, please go to the website, download this document, and you can share it out with everyone and spread the word of Australians for Better Government. Another thing you should be spreading the word about is Let's Rethink Renewables. So please head to letsrethinkrenewables.org and check this website out. It's all about pushing back against the reckless rollout of renewable projects, whether it be large-scale wind and solar projects across Australia's landscapes, high-voltage transmission lines, or whatever that comes along with it that's carving up, our productive farmlands and rural landscapes, and also, most importantly, carving through our precious wildlife habitats. So please head to the website, letsrethinkrenewables.org. And if you can scroll down to this point here, you can also sign up to be a member. It's only $10 per year, and it really helps everything that Let's Rethink Renewables is trying to do. We're also in the planning stages of some big events for this group as well. So stay tuned, and let's push back against this crazy rollout of renewables that is happening throughout Australia at the moment. And lastly, just to finish off, I want you to know about the new edition of the Light Australia newspaper. It's at their website now, thelight.australia.com. Check it out. Always great articles in the Light. And if you want to be a distributor, head to the website and find the distribute links, and it will give you the instructions on how you can get that newspaper out to your local community. So let's kick it off. I've been speaking to this gentleman a number of times now. This is the fourth time he's been on the show. You can head back to episodes 58, which is the first one that we had him on, where we discussed his book, which is a capital idea, which we'll touch on tonight, and how you can get a copy of that. Also had him on episodes 64 and 78. So if you want to go back and rewatch those episodes, some of the best, well-received episodes that we've ever done on Commanding the Narrative. Very, very highly regarded amongst our audience, this gentleman tonight. And we're going to be speaking about the Aboriginal Genocide, whether it happened or whether it didn't happen. We want to hear from this man. He's well-versed in Australian history. So let's please welcome him to the stage. Dr. Christopher Reynolds, welcome back to Command the Narrative, mate.
Good evening. Nice to be with you, Stephen.
Nice to be with you as always. Now, before we get into Aboriginal history and Australian history, which is a big part of Australian history, you would have seen I played that clip of Donald Trump in the beginning of the show. We're definitely living through some interesting times at the moment, and it all centers a lot, in large part around Donald Trump. And I know we've had you on previously talking about Trump and Zelensky and the changing nature of the world. No, where we're at now, things are moving so fast in the current moment. Where do you see everything playing out in world affairs, and where do you see Donald Trump currently?
Well, as you know, I used to work very closely with the White House when I worked as senior professional staff with the Senate Judiciary Committee. But I was in contact at that stage with the people who were in charge of foreign affairs and international affairs, and also the finance in the Senate. So I was close to what was going on in the White House at that stage. And the first thing one has to realize that while Donald Trump gets all the media as such, there are 5,000 people that work around him for the White House, as well as about another 5,000 or so that work in the Congress. So these are the people that are actually working things through, writing the strategies, bringing it all up to the point where there are basically incredibly factual statements, and if they're not, you won't be working there by Friday. So the information and the intelligence that comes up to that level for the president to be making decisions is incredibly accurate and also incredibly important. What I find is interesting at this point, and I think that's probably the key word right at this time, is to say we are not involved. We're not American to start with, and we're certainly not in the inner circle of the White House. So the best that we can do is watch. We can't really have an opinion because it's not us. It's not in our position to have one, and we're not in any position to influence what's going on. So we are bystanders in what's happening across the world. It's at that position of being a bystander, but at least understanding what's going on in the White House. That the first thing is that the Democratic domestic onslaught against the president with whatever they could possibly do to stop him through the courts is slowly but surely coming to an end. We get to hear the results of the infighting and the bickering that goes on with the Democrats. But for the first time in, I don't know when, how long, that we are seeing a president of the United States that has just decided he's going to get involved in international affairs. Right, I'm going to get involved with the Soviet and the Ukraine issue. I'm going to bring them to the table as confident as anything. And eventually he says, these two hate each other so much, not even I can get them with bribing them, money, benefits, whatever, to stop their hatred for each other. Now he then turns it to the Middle East, and America and the world has got another problem that's been lingering for 20-something years, that various presidents and the NATO people, even the Arabs, have tried to do something about, and that is Iran has just got this hatred for Israel that is insatiable. There's nothing you can do with it. And I mean, it also ties in with their hatred for some reason of America. So they continue to use the money that they've been given to stop the nuclear program to just spend on the Palestinians and cause more wars. So it's a brave man, a hawk, that's decided with Trump to say, we're going to put an end to it. Have we got a bomb big enough that can actually do this? And while everybody's still thinking about it, he, the businessman, has just done it. You know, there was no real phone calls, except we must understand that he did not do this without talking to the leader of the Congress, the House, as well as the Senate. They were very much aware and part of the decision to go ahead with that bombing. But the news said, oh, Russia's going to react, China's going to react. We're on the verge of World War III. And Putin said, well, I've signed this non-proliferation atomic bomb treaty, so I'm not getting involved. And China's saying, do you know the domestics I've got going on over here? Do you think I want to get involved with the Israelis and the Arabs? And so they're sort of watching the news as well. It's fascinating, however, that on camera, as you showed, that he definitely is trying to move forward, progress, and do something about the conflicts. For him to lose his patience and his temper with the Israelis on camera and swear about the fact that they weren't playing their part in this business negotiation just shows you two things. One is neutrality in the event, and the second is tenacity in trying to solve the problem. So he gets on the phone and he tells the Israelis, if you've got planes in the air, you will bring them back now. Now, what he actually did other than confronting them, I don't know, but they turned around and brought the planes back. So, you know, what is he doing other than he's coming at the whole way one does politics, not like a bureaucrat. He's coming at it like a businessman. People have voted him in because they wanted that difference. They wanted someone who you could relate to. He might have far more money than we do, but he's still handling the basic issues as if we handled them ourselves, and he has the ability to do it. So we're in a fascinating time in world politics.
No, it's definitely fascinating. I look at that point where he swore on camera. It was the first time a president has sworn intentionally on camera before. I mean, when you say intentionally, I think he did it. I think he was calculated in doing it. I don't think it was just an abrupt thing. I think he was trying to send the message to these people, whether it be Iran or Israel or even Russia and Ukraine and other conflicts around the world. He almost wants to just throttle them and say, hey, guys, don't you see how much potential your countries could have? We could be building hotels. We could be, really bringing peace to the world. We could be doing so many incredible things. And you guys are just so hell-bent on blowing each other up. Why can't you come to your senses?
Yeah. I always love the line with the interview with Zelensky. We've done this before, but it fascinated me. And Zelensky says, yes, we want peace in the world. When we kill all Russian, we will have peace. And Donald looks at him and says, but you're talking about World War III. Yes. What is your point? Yes. What is your point? And I mean, Donald's just in shock that, you know, he couldn't get over just the emotion and the history that you've lost your sense of logic. I also was fascinated that when you see the full clip of that interview, there was someone before Donald walked into the room that said, you know, you need to get rid of your army T-shirt. This is the White House. You're in the Oval Office. Why don't you have a suit? And Zelensky said, I have suit. I just not wear it. I have good suit. Next time I come, maybe I even have new suit. And here this week, in the last few days in NATO, Zelensky bounces up to Donald and shakes his hand. He's got such enthusiasm, and he's wearing a suit. You know, and you think, all right, what's happening? And I mean, the result of the Iran business and the bomb and the effect on NATO. And you got to watch this one, because he's actually said to NATO, and they know, 100,000 US troops are going to be withdrawn unless you start to play ball. You know, you rather defend yourselves, or there won't be any defense. And believe me, Putin may actually be really willing to come and invade you. So what are you going to do? But it seems that he, from what I can pick up, he didn't say that. He said, you're all such wonderful people. NATO is this great organization. You know, I'm so glad we've got NATO. How about you actually put some more money in it? Oh, Donald, oh, you're such a daddy. We've been waiting for you to come along. You know, daddy's come home. How about 5%? and they're doing it. And, you know, you got to scratch your head and say, there's just something about how he approached them, what he says. And he you know, you see him doing these speeches and he's repetitive. He repeats himself, and you've got to wonder about his intelligence level because he repeats himself. But the few interviews, when you catch him on being interviewed, he is sharp. He does understand the question, and he is concise with his answers. And I think it's also quite amazing that he's got this open White House policy that if you've got a question, then we'll seek to answer it. And he is. But that's when he's at his best, when he's not reading a script. But he's got something about him as a businessman that's just always thinking about advantages and saving face and what's in it for the person that he's talking to. So it's a fascinating time that we have in history, just watching what this man's doing.
No, it definitely is. I mean, I don't want to get bogged down too much on it, but just to, I guess, to finish up on this issue before we move to the main part of this podcast, when you look at these conflicts going around the world, do you think that he's capable of being able to resolve them, or do you think that the hatred between these countries is so deep that it's just going to be ongoing and no one's going to be able to solve it?
Well, you've got two things going on: human nature and conflict and tribalism, and how people want to protect their own families and territory. But the other side of that is the aggressive side of human nature. That's always the greedy side that wants more land or wants more of this or something else. So, I mean, we're not going to eradicate sin. And I don't think that he's out to actually do that. The American psyche is very much about America and not the rest of the world. And there's always been a resistance in getting involved in other people's wars, i.e. the First World War and even the Second World War. America, the population didn't want to be involved. And yet, so it's interesting that the American people, if you know, believing that the polls, see this man having strength. There's a problem. I'm not going to talk to CNN. We're just going to fix it. So no, I don't think he's out to solve everybody's problems. But there has obviously seen American foreign policy is always a reflection of its domestic realities. And when America sees that this Iran crowd have got a bomb that could actually bring on a war, then that's an American problem, as far as America can see. So it had to be solved. And throwing more money at it, etc., wasn't doing it. So I don't think he's going to get involved in everybody's war. He could certainly stop a lot of these American companies, the war industry, from selling bombs everywhere. But just we have to just watch and see and trust that he is a man with sense, common sense, and he is concerned. I'm also very impressed that he has had an experience of faith. And he's been now along to several prayer breakfasts, and he's mixing with Christians in Washington, and it must have affected him. But him surviving a bullet by millimeters that saved his life has really jolted him. And for a man to say, I've got this job because God saved my life, this also means that he's got a sense of purpose and dedication in what he's doing. So at this point, let's sit and watch and be glad that a man that has faith is in the White House.
Yeah, well, we definitely will keep watching, and to think that he's only about 5 or 6 months in.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
it must be time for lunch.
All right, let's get into what we're going to talk about tonight, and that is these horrible British settlers coming to this country and just genociding the poor Aboriginal people. And we need reconciliation for that, and we need treaties, and we need Makarrata commissions to do some real truth telling, and we're going to do some truth telling tonight. So let's maybe start off with the definition of genocide. Now, if you head to the Encyclopedia Britannica, it says that genocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction of a group of people because of their ethnicity, nationality, race, or religion. The term is derived from the Greek genos, race, tribe, or nation, and the Latin side, which is killing. So that explains the term genocide. Now, when I was at school, I'm 40 years old. It wasn't that long ago, I would hope, that I was in school. I mean, they didn't teach us about Aboriginal genocide. They taught us a lot about Aborigines. There was a big focus on the Aboriginals, but you would have thought that being educated in the New South Wales education system, if there was a genocide that happened, they would have been ramming it down our throats. I'm sure that's what's happening now with our generations in school now. But this term of Aboriginal genocide, for me, seems to be a new term. It seems to have only really popped up in the last decade or two. Is that the case? Has there always been talk about an Aboriginal genocide when you've gone through the historical records?
It's a misnomer, and the word is being misused. And yet there are two aspects to the full-blood Aboriginal people disintegrating as a race. Two things. One has to do, as I've done in the book, have a very detailed look at how the race that we call Aborigines, the native tribes, the various native tribes of this nation, were incredibly violent. And that's no different to other primitive tribes, but primitive, I used in the term of being uncivilized compared to the standard in terms of industrialization, law, order, social structure, these sort of things that we sort of say, well, this is a sophisticated civil country. So a primitive society of hunters and gatherers were amazingly violent, not just in terms of intra-tribal violence, in terms of the incredible number of killings that went on between tribes, but inter-tribal violence, but intra-tribal violence. And that is all the killings that took place within a tribe. Domestic violence was absolutely massive. 1/3 of all Aboriginal women, 1/3, were beaten to death, clubbed to death. It was a common practice. If a woman gave the fella trouble, then he just beat her to death. And an Aboriginal man could have up to 26 or more wives. So, you know, counting them on your fingers and saying, oh, I'm now down to 23, didn't make much difference. But the other incredible thing that we miss, that apart from the violence, was the fact that by age 11, some 57% of Aboriginal children that had been born had died. 57%. I mean, that was just amazing that the children, and it was something like 25, 35% of all children within the first year died. It was just tremendous in terms of the conditions that people tried to live in a primitive society. So you've got all the internal violence, the inter-tribal violence, and some tribes were wiped out, and others were just down to a dozen people. And then you've got all the internal stuff that was going on. Now, apart from that keeping the tribal numbers low, and I mean, as I've gone through the documents, the newspaper reports, the letters, the diaries, I cannot find right up until Macquarie, and there must be some, but I cannot find an example of anybody writing back to England or recording in a government document of any sort of murders of Aborigines that were recorded. I mean, once we get to Macquarie, then we've got the thing of business that they're going on with the Aborigines killing people out in the Nepean area at Campbelltown. And it got to the point that Macquarie was saying, oh, well, you know, this is them, and, you know, we just have to be tolerant. And I know that there's been dozens of people killed, but what can you do, etc. But the night that this group of 30 marauders who'd been raiding families and killing people, the night they cut off Mrs. Lewis's head was the line in the sand for Macquarie. And that was it. He was on his feet. He was angry. He sent 3 battalions out to find these 30 people. And even with them searching around, it was Aborigines that helped the soldiers find the 30 marauders and who was with them. And they were under strict instructions to say, surrender, surrender. And it was only if they fired upon or threw spears at the soldiers that they should defend themselves. Now, in that, there were 14 people who were actually killed, Aborigines, and a number of them actually inadvertently fell off a cliff near the river. So they weren't all shot by the soldiers. And the fellow in charge, years later, regretted. He was so sorry that those 14 people were killed. He didn't say he murdered them, and he didn't say we fired on them outside of regulations. That wasn't the case. He only was defending his people and fired upon the Aborigines after being attacked. So it's up until then I can't find. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't skirmishes, but we can't say that all Aborigines were violent, and there is no evidence of Aboriginal wars. And even a little later, where there was where the governor, and it was after oh no, it wasn't. It was Brisbane, I think. Who was a lazy old fellow that liked. He was an astrologer. He liked living out of Parramatta with the stars. It was at the point, I'm sure it was Brisbane, who decided that there was such attacks by the Aborigines on the settlers at Bathurst, and he declared martial law to do something. Sent 75 troops out to Bathurst, and so they was basically, they marched up and down and made a noise and whatever. But not one Aborigine was killed, and the chief of the tribe was given a message to come and see the governor, which he and the tribe did. So they journeyed from Bathurst all the way to Sydney. The governor then pardoned them, you know, bless you, my son. And then only a month later, they all attended a festival. So if anybody thinks that there was any killings at Bathurst, they are completely and utterly wrong in terms of what took place at that event, and probably wrong about what took place at Campbelltown. Now, the issue you're asking is if there was genocide. And I've said, firstly, the Aboriginal population was kept low through no fault of white settlers. The interracial, the black on black murders were far outstretched anything to do with black on white and white on black. But the second and most important issue that doesn't really come to a head until 1900, when they do a census of the nation right across the nation. And the censor himself stops. It took him a few years to write it up by hand. And he stops when he comes to the issue of the indigenous or Aboriginal people. And he notes that of the people that have been counted in the census, that now 95% of people that can be identified in any way as being indigenous, 95% were now Creole or mixed blood. And people, only 5% of all Aboriginals in the country in 1900 were actually full-blood Aboriginal. Today, of course, it's less than 1%. So when we chase this issue, as he did, why is it that people had chosen to intermarry with white people instead of continuing to be part of their tribe? And the reason, as I can pick it up from the various writings from people like Daisy Bates and a stack of others, is that the Aboriginal women and children could not get out of primitive Aboriginal society fast enough. I mean, the poverty, the starvation, the deprivation, the disease, the injuries, the lack of medical care, the deaths of the children. 50% of your children were dead by 11, and so it went on. It was just a horrible, deprived environment to live in the bush and eat raw food, etc., etc. So people couldn't get out of it fast enough. So what's happened in Australia is what's happened in other places of the world, America, Brazil, Singapore, and that is we now have a Creole race. We have very few people in this country that are pure Aboriginal. They're there, but they're very few. So when I hear people saying, "Oh, I'm Aboriginal and I heard this story and Mary down the end of the bar told me this," how do they know? Because they're not linked and could not be linked because they're considered outsiders. So that the disintegration of the Aboriginal race, as the census said in 1900, is in full swing. And when I look at the statistics today, when 70% of married Indigenous people are married to non-Indigenous people, then we have the continuation of this slide where the Aboriginal race is on its way to extinction. It has nothing to do with people having to kill them. It's people wanting to get out of a terrible culture.
You know, I brought this up on the show before when I interviewed Kerry White, who's an Aboriginal elder out in South Australia and up in the Northern Territory, and she was telling us about how when she was younger, the Aboriginal mothers would seek out the missions just to get away from their tribe because they were well fed in the missions, they were protected, they were sheltered, they were looked after.
Yeah, when you go and find pictures of the missions, firstly, this was Christian benevolence that was in, who paid for the missions, not the government. This was people using their own money. The churches were using their funds, their staff, and as you just said, they paid for the food, the clothing, and how many people who had children, and they should know if they're going to stay in the tribe, who would leave the children at the door of the mission. And so when I found pictures of children in the mission, I first thought, well, they're all in uniform. They're all smiling for the camera. Nobody's crying, nobody's suffering. You could see the happiness that was there. So I think that the missions and the incredible work they've done over 1,500 years has been denied the praise that they deserve, because they've done a tremendous thing for humanity, regardless of the color of their skin or what you want to call them. The churches in this instance is there for human welfare in the name of Christ, and you've got to give them the praise that they deserve for giving up their lives to do so.
So what I want to do is, first I'm going to kick off with a little bit of Wikipedia fact or fiction. I think you've already covered some of this already, but maybe we'll just drum it in, because I think a lot of the people these days, they get their information from Wikipedia, and that's probably problematic. But then we'll go into some more credible sources as well to kind of deconstruct the narrative that's out there about these killings supposedly that happened. So the first one that I want to bring up is this Wikipedia article here, which is the genocide of indigenous Australians. And as I said, you already touched on this a little bit, but it says when Britain established its first Australian colony in 1788, the Aboriginal population is estimated to have been 300,000 or more than 1 million people. So between 300,000 and 1 million people, comprising of 600 tribes or nations and 250 languages with various dialects. By 1901, the Aboriginal population had fallen to just over 90,000 people, mainly due to disease, frontier violence, and the disruption of traditional society. So you were saying that was more due to interbreeding with white settlers and things like that. So that's the reason why the population.
You run through that just again. You said violence. What were the three things you read? Why was it trade?
Disease, frontier violence,
no,
and the disruption of traditional society.
No, it wasn't disease, and it wasn't frontier. What do you call it? What was the word?
Violence. Frontier
There's nothing to do with the frontier. What frontier? These people have been killing each other all over the country. There wasn't any frontier, and there has never, ever, ever, ever been a war between the Aborigines and the Caucasians in this country. Never has there been such a war where Aborigines lined up 100 or more people against 100 more people. Never in this country have we had that sort of conflict. Now, the thing is that when they say moving away from traditional values or something, this is people getting out of the horrific primitive lifestyle, the Stone Age lifestyle, as fast as they can. And that was going on. Now, but you see, the moment you say, oh, there were 600,000 people, who told you that? It's not the Aboriginal culture, because the tribes didn't know. It's some person in the 20th century who's sitting at a computer or has got a pen and a bit of paper who's calculating back. But it's fiction. It's just total fiction. They don't know how many people were here when Arthur Phillip landed. They do not know. And again, when they get up to the census, it would be a matter of reading the census, as the hymn say, and maybe the statistics there, but that's where we would find the statistic of how many Aboriginal people. He's got the figure, someone mentioned the figure of 90,000. So what? When you look at that, if the census then gave that figure, he's saying 83% of those people were now Creole. And so you can't say they were down to 90,000. They were down to full-blooded Aborigines, 7,000. And that's how fast the race has been disintegrating. And not through disease, because they always had diseases. And it's a misnomer, a total piece of fiction that suggests that the Europeans brought diseases that killed the Aboriginal people. Absolute nonsense, because when one studies this issue, sailors were afraid coming into foreign places that they were going to catch diseases, because people pick a country, Brazil, already had immunities to a lot of diseases, and so it was the new people who would catch the local disease. And so it was also in Australia, or the British coming here. They were more afraid of picking up Aboriginal diseases than ever giving diseases to the country. So let's say there was an interchange of diseases, if that was possible. But the Aborigines already had disease that had nothing to do with foreigners coming into the country. So, I mean, so the disease didn't kill them. The violence certainly did amongst themselves. There were no frontier wars, and people did want to walk away from their traditional lifestyle because it was killing them.
Well, back to,
it's there but not there.
Back to Wikipedia, and I will get off Wikipedia in a second. But this one here is called Australian Frontier Wars, and it's a whole clip about apparently the first conflict took place several months after the landing of the first fleet in January.
That's just rubbish. It's absolutely the guy's telling lies. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Where did he get his evidence? Because it's not out of any of the diaries. It's not in Phillip's diary, who was the governor. It's not in the Attorney General's diary, which David Collins. It is not in the doctor's diary. It is not in King's diary. And I mean, you've got to then really get into David Collins's work and all that he wrote up, because half of his book, that you can get on, it's called, but it was published a few years after he left. He spends an amazing amount of time with the Aborigines and writes up an incredible amount of encounters. Now, where was the conflict? There wasn't the conflict. When I go through the story of Phillip, you see, Phillip got on incredibly well with the Aborigines when he arrived. And it was a puzzle to me, because everybody else that had come to Australia talked about being eaten or beaten. And even Cook, when he arrived at Botany Bay, said, "Oh well, they threw their spears at us." I know, and that was a bit interesting. And I think what's his name, Banks Joseph picked up a few and took them home, which has recently sort of shown up in things. But Phillip did. I mean, Cook just found it all fascinating, really. You know, that they're throwing their javelins at us. He said, you know, sort of thing. But he got back on the boat. When Phillip arrives, when you read his diary, he says he's out of the boat and he's on the beach. He's got Gidley King behind him, and you know, here's some Aborigines, and he wants to say, "G'day, fellas." And you know, the Aborigines are looking at these fellas all dressed up in their red uniforms and their hats, and really don't know what they're looking at. And he smiles at them, and the Aborigines go, and this is what happened. The Aborigines go, they go into shock, and he says to Gidley, "What's happening?" Gidley says, I don't know what's happening, but don't stop doing it." And when I tried to work out what was going on, was it because he was short? Was it because he had sort of olive skin, because he had German? Was he doing sign languages because he spoke 5 languages? And what it was, he was missing his front tooth. And when he smiled, all the Aborigines smiled back at him, who were also missing their front tooth, because it was a mark of the process from boyhood to manhood. And so they basically said, well, we don't know which tribe he's from, and he certainly dresses funny, but he's obviously of somebody's tribe. And so what you read officially is how instantly he got on with the Aborigines. And it says that he walked around Botany Bay with the Aborigines, deciding on where he was going to park his big canoe. And they said, "Oh, you know, it's a bit shallow there, Phillip. You won't get it in over there. Oh, and there's mangroves over there, and I don't think the council's going to let you park your big canoe in amongst the mangroves." And I think, as I read it and studied it, it was the Aborigines that suggested that he go up to Port Jackson, because when the fleet was arriving, he was rowing out in a pinnace, he knew where he was going, up to Port Jackson. When he pulled into Port Jackson, the same thing happened. He got on so well with the Aborigines that they sat on the beach for 2 days and chatted before he said, "Now, I'm going back to get the bigger canoes and we'll all be back in a couple of days." And they all waved him goodbye. There was absolutely no violence whatsoever. And Phillip records the interactions with the chief around the cooking pot, and how the chief was impressed with them all boiling meat. Now, when it moves on a bit further, there is a kerfuffle with the rush cutters, but they had actually killed some people before the Aboriginals killed them. And Phillip went back and said to the rest of the community, "You will stay away and you will not hurt the Aborigines." Now, it's a bit further on that there's a whale that's come up on the beach at Manly, and Phillip goes over on the invitation of Bennelong to get a piece of the meat. And there's some old Aboriginal that doesn't know what's going on, and Phillip puts out his hands and said, "Hi, you know, I'm here." And the fellow throws his spear. Well, the spear goes through Phillip's shoulder. He almost dies in the event. The Aboriginals run off, and Phillip lives. They take him back to hospital. And 2 months later, Bennelong shows up, and he says, "I'm really sorry for what happened. We found the guy who threw the spear. Do you want us to take revenge?" And Phillip says, No, you mustn't take revenge on him. And Bennelong is so impressed with Phillip's attitude that he then brings other Aborigines to live in the community. A Spanish, and this is only recent, a Spanish naval a captain, it must have been a merchant, shows up in Sydney, and this is 1793, and he is in Sydney. He's been invited to the governor's house to have a meal. And he writes in his diary, or his log, that's been recently translated in the last 7 or 8 years or something. He says, "When I got to Sydney," he said, "I couldn't believe it." He said, "There were children, Aboriginal children and Caucasians playing in the street in the little town. You know, I couldn't believe it." He said, "I went to dinner and sat down with the governor, and there I was sitting with Aborigines having dinner in the governor's house." He said, "It's the most integrated place I've been to in the world." Now, there's no violence there, and that's recorded by a Spanish merchant. And then when I went into the whole thing of how many Aborigines integrated in society, and I wrote it up in my book, and there's a guy called I'm going to forget his name, Bennelong, I think. No, I'm going to get it wrong. But he was there, and he got a number of 27 of the officers' uniforms, and he would entertain the ships coming in. And I wrote him up as Australia's first tourist agent. And there he was saying, and he'd take off the government, and he'd walk up and down. And well, he was still there, and he was running an Aboriginal farm at the time of Macquarie. And I found in Macquarie's diary where he says, "Oh, we've just had a celebration, the annual celebration for the children that are in the Aboriginal school. Oh," says Elizabeth, "we must go out and give Banaroo some food." So they get on the barge and they take up cattle and ducks and things to the Aboriginal farm. And we have totally missed the success of the integration. And there is one person that I found who was a problem to the community, and I'm going to forget his name too. It's a guy, Willamira or something. But it turns out he was a lunatic. He caused everybody problems. And eventually, it wasn't that he started a war against the settlers. Aboriginal people so hated him that they came across people of his own tribe. And it says they murdered them and they raped the women to the point of exhaustion. And that's how much they hated this man that was considered the leader of the frontier wars. And so this fellow went and injured a man that had a nickname of Collins. And then another big Aboriginal fellow by the name of Big Caesar then found him and he killed him. And the guy was dead in 1895. So, I mean, he was only sort of on the fringes of things. There were never any frontier wars with the Aborigines. And it's just not true.
Just to finish up quickly with this Wikipedia stuff, because I guess why I'm focusing on this is because so many people use this as a resource to learn. And people want to learn about this sort of stuff, and they're getting this information, I guess, presented to them when it might not be true. But it says here, some historians have argued that under prevailing European legal doctrine, such land was deemed terra nullius, or land belonging to nobody, or land empty of inhabitants. However, terra nullius was not part of British law at the time, and Cook was instructed only to take possession of land if he found it uninhabited. So I guess the main point of that is when Captain Cook arrived, was terra nullius part of international law? It's claiming that it wasn't.
It's a great topic. I get into it in my book in some detail. Now, terra nullius is a Latin phrase. You can pick that up, terra nullius. It's Latin. The Romans used it. And it doesn't mean nobody lives here, as you've just pointed out. People need to study their languages, their Greek and their Latin, if they dare to go on and take on these phrases. It means nobody rules here. And that's a big difference. So if you found a king that was in charge of a country and you didn't want to necessarily slaughter them all, as was the common practice, would just go in and whatever, and you felt you could trade with them or or put him in subservience and take annual tribute, which is the common way they did that all across the place. So they didn't need to take it; they just brought people into subservience. Where they didn't find, as in Australia, you had a situation of a common ruler where nobody ruled. There wasn't any government, legal system, social structures, etc. Then yes, you could shrug your shoulders and say, all right, we're now claiming this. But you had to, when you read the principles of terra nullius that were written out by the French, as well as I think John Locke also contributed, and major British lawyers, Blackstone as well, to the definition of, it had to be a settlement. It wasn't a military thing, which is the reason why, if the British were going to protect the East India Company by setting up some sort of base against the possible French attack, it needed to be a proper settlement to use the international law of terra nullius, which had been used 100 years before the British with the Spanish and Portuguese, and many years before that. But here's the thing. Across Europe, because it's an international law, not just the British, the French, the Dutch, the Germans, the Germans, the Russians had all used the law of terra nullius, but so had the Americans, and so have Australia. When we took New Guinea, as well as Norfolk Island, we did so under the international law of Terra Nullius. And when we did that in Queensland, and then the British King saw what we'd done, he then sent a letter, a letters pattern, to the government of Queensland saying, yes, it's all right, my son, I will back you up in what you've done. So it's a law that has been applied, and here's the thing, it's still an international law. So if we actually found a piece of land that we didn't know existed, Antarctica, or even some other place that was an island, and we wanted it, if we set out a colony and put a flag in the ground and said, we hereby claim it in the name of, it's done, because that's international law. Now you could go to The Hague, which remains the place of international law and court, to examine it. Now I had a friend who brought this issue up, and he used to be a United Church minister, and he was very benevolent in the way he thinks about things. And he was saying, what about the Mabo decision? Surely that neutralised the law of Terra Nullius. And I said, righto, John, it's down tools, and I will read through the court case of Mabo, and I will look for what they have to say about Terra Nullius. Well, I was looking for just sentences out of 150 pages. I ended up with 5 pages of my own, where the Supreme Court of Australia, justified the British use of Terra Nullius in only Australia. 5 pages of one sentences where the High Court said, yes, Britain still has the right to the law of ownership of Australia under the law of Terra Nullius. And they quote the famous British judge by the name of Blackstone, who says, the moment the King put his signature to the letters pattern, Britain owned Australia. And this is important. When I got to the conclusion of the Mabo thing, after they sort of dodged that issue of Terra Nullius, the conclusion is only like about 3 sentences, and they say, I don't know why we're looking at this case, because we don't have jurisdiction. This is a Queensland matter, and if you want to talk about land rights in Queensland under the law of Terra Nullius, you have to go to Queensland. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And that's it. So that's why the next year that Paul Keating changed the laws and brought in a federal law where the federal government now took control and oversight of Aboriginal land, and thus was able to then give land rights to the Torres Strait Islanders. But it's not under the international Terra Nullius, and that's again in my book. But it's again something that people who have not got the background on the education or the study have any idea what they're talking about.
Well, what about this here? This is the Parliament of Australia website. Now, you'd think this is a credible source. You scroll down, it's talking about the Mabo decision, and it says here, the judgment overturned the concept of Terra Nullius.
It's a lie.
That Australia was a land belonging to no one at the time of James Cook in 1770, declared possession in the name of the British Crown.
Listen to that. Captain Cook, he didn't claim Australia. He made the mistake of only claiming, and had really nothing to do. He claimed the East Coast. He didn't give any numbers of the depth of the land that he was claiming. It was virtue signalling, is all it was. And he knew, and everybody, just putting a flag in the sand was not an expression of Terra Nullius. I mean, so there's the ignorance of the person that wrote it. And what was the second thing? That nobody lived here. Well, the person doesn't know his languages. It's nobody rules here. So that's the second stage.
This is the Parliament of Australia website, mate.
I've got better credentials than the person who wrote that, and I am telling you what the truth is. I will not put up with some bureaucrat that I used to order around to write and correct their writing. Just because somebody wrote it doesn't give him any intelligence in what he is saying.
No, I mean, I'm more pointing it out because this is what's out there. This is, I mean, look, I'm going to take you down a rabbit hole now. And this, I mean, bear with me.
This has been fun so far. I've only said the Australian government. I sound like Trump. You know, we need to get rid of these idiot bureaucrats. Someone give them an education. How did this man get this job?
Well, let me bring you this. This is the website for the Australian Museum, right? And this is
Oh, there's a good crowd. I mean, they've got all sorts of flags and things up. When you go and see the museum, you have a fit just at the doorway. Go on, tell me they've got a collection of bones or something.
Okay, so this is all right. This is the genocide. Now, this is serious. So this is the genocide in Australia, right? Now, now this was written. I guess this sentence here means it was written by a librarian and essayist, whatever. I don't know what.
Yeah, what qualifications they got? Come on.
Yeah. All right. So, and I'm slowly reading this article, and it's talking about the killings, and it's got all these these images here, and it's referring to some of these sources. So I go down to the bottom, and it's got these sources here, right? So, this is where the rabbit hole starts. Now, one of the sources is this article from The Guardian that was written. It's called "The Killing Times: The Massacres of Aboriginal People Australia Must Confront." And it's even, as you scroll down, it's even got this map here where it shows you all the massacres that happened since 1770. And,
that's just rubbish. I can't help myself. I mean, I can't help myself. How did they get this? Firstly, they define massacre as where 3 people were killed. Okay, that's 3 people killed. Why were they killed? Oh, well, and when I examined this recently with another guy that was doing the same thing, and I looked through the references as you did, when I got down to his references, I mean, I think, why did you put these references in? It says, man was killed by native police, that is Aborigines, because he was wanted for theft of cattle and he resisted arrest. That's a massacre. When the police actually shoot someone, that he may have, whatever that is, that is not a massacre. A massacre is when, as you pointed out earlier, is when you purposely go in to murder people who don't know it's happening and no way to defend themselves. If you're talking about a war, resistance, etc., where you've got unarmed people, the massacres were the cadres of Aborigines that attacked family homes and murdered women and children night after night. People talk to me about the Tasmanian massacres. I said it was absolutely terrible, wasn't it? 250 white settlers were murdered in just 5 years. It was disgusting. And people look at me like, what are you talking about? I said, well, why do you think they walked through Tasmania trying to clear out the Aborigines who'd already gone? And they only got 1 man and a boy. I said, because the massacres of the white settlers had got to a point of being totally intolerable. If we had 25 people massacred in a town today by the bikies or someone, the nation would be in an uproar. But 250 settlers had been literally massacred, unarmed women and children killed in the night. So talk to me about massacres. You know, it just makes me absolutely ill that they don't understand who was actually initiating the violence. The other thing go on.
Mate, I'm only halfway through the rabbit hole.
All right, give me the rest and I'll try to be quicker.
As I'm trying to, click through these articles, I come to this one here. This is from ABC News. More evidence of genocidal killings of Aboriginal people in frontier times. University of Newcastle research reveals. So as I'm reading this article, this name pops up that I'd noticed in a few of the articles that I've gone through already. This Professor Lyndall Ryan from the University of Newcastle. So I'm like, oh, here's a thread that I can click on. So I typed in this Professor Lyndall Ryan, and this clip here comes up, which is, I think, very interesting. So let's play this, and then I'll get your comments from there.
All right.
Historians' footnotes. Wind Shuttle uncovers damning evidence of fudged figures and exaggerated claims.
Well, in some cases, there are claims by the historians I'm criticising that can be shown to be absolutely false. People who were supposed to be on the spot were somewhere else. And there are other cases where historians, Lyndall Ryan has made a whole range of claims about events that happened, and she's given footnotes to them, as historians are supposed to do. And when you look up the footnotes, you find there's nothing there.
There are a couple of references missing, but they are readily found in the archives and can be checked. And he's chosen not to do that.
Lyndall Ryan cites the diary of the colony's first chaplain, the Reverend Robert Knopwood, as the source for her claim that between 1804 and 1808, colonists killed 100 Aborigines. The diaries, however, record only 4 Aborigines being killed in this period.
It's a devastating claim Ryan cannot refute.
Right. I certainly agree that the Knopwood diaries say that, but I also had another reference referring to a report by John Oxley, who was a surveyor. He said too many Aborigines were being killed.
Okay, but how did you extrapolate from his words saying too many Aborigines had been killed to about 100 lost their lives?
Well, I think by the way in which Oxley wrote that he seemed to think there had been a great loss of life from the Aborigines.
So in a sense, is it fair enough for him to say that you did make up figures? You're telling me you made an estimate.
But historians are always making up figures.
Can you believe? So this is the woman driving this research. This is why you're getting articles in The Guardian and you're getting these maps showing all the massacres and you're getting articles in the ABC. It's all based off this woman's research from the University of Newcastle. And she goes on a national broadcast. I don't know what year this was from, but it looks a bit dated. And she says that historians make things up. She's admitting that she's making this stuff up.
Yeah, she is. And while, I mean, the thing is, you see, when I set out to do this project, my background is that I was one of the first people in Australia when I was going through university who chose to do a course in Aboriginal studies. Flinders University decided to put it on. I was doing my dip ed and I enjoyed it. And then I worked with Don Dunstan on helping the Pitjantjatjara people get a piece of land as big as Britain, as big as England. And so I went off to America to do my PhD, having done all the background work. And the year I left, it did actually pass the Parliament in South Australia. And I've been with Aboriginal people, etc. But they're humans. They're nothing special. They're Australians. That's good. So am I. I'm a native Australian, etc. But you see, when I wanted to come at this project, I didn't have an opinion. I don't have any political agenda to push with writing about the Aborigines. It's a subject that needs to be cleared up in terms of what's being said. But so I got into diaries and newspaper reports as much as I could to actually find the truth. Now, when that woman said, "Oh, Oxley said this," but wait a minute, I thought you're talking about killings in 1804. Well, yes. Well, Oxley didn't arrive till after 1810. And his walking around as an explorer was in the 1815 to 16. You've got your dates wrong. So Oxley had nothing to do with any killings that took place. And if you get out a map and have a look at the size of the colony in 1804, it's a pinpoint on the map. It really isn't. It wasn't until you get to Hamilton Hume, and that again is in 1815, that you've got any exploration over the Blue Mountains that Hamilton Hume, even as a teenager, told Wentworth and Blackstone and Lawson what to do. But they only got up to the top and turned around and said, "Oh, it's tea time. We'll have to go back now." They didn't even cross it. So Evans, as surveyor, was then told by Macquarie to get Hamilton and go over and map it all the way down. And then it was Hamilton Hume, of course, that went all the way down to Melbourne. So there's no expansion until after 1815. So if you want to talk about massacres around Sydney, it's rubbish because the colony was just so small and who was killing who? They'd already been there and knew everybody and the Aborigines were already integrated. So she's not just wrong. It becomes fabrication.
Well, the thing is, she's admitting that she's fabricating it. She just said historians make stuff up. So
yeah. Here's the other thing. Here's another little thing. I throw this in. When I have found, like, there was an event with the Australian Agricultural Company when they took land at Port Macquarie, and there was an event where the fellows that went up to survey it and mark it out did actually kill some Aborigines. So all right, let me get into the diaries and the notes and the newspaper reports. So again, what actually happened was that the Aborigines attacked them, killed some fellow, and in self-defense, the white settlers defended themselves and attacked the Aborigines. Now, here's the funny thing that I don't understand with what I hear. And again, I'm hearing it from people that are Creole. They're not full-blood Aborigines and have got no right to talk about what happened in the past. And the other thing is that if they were full-blood Aborigines, they do not have any lineage to grandfather or anybody belong. They don't know who their great-grandfathers were, and any dates and facts that they roll out are given to them by white people, not Aborigines. But here's the thing, under Aboriginal law, which is custom, if indeed I suffer some atrocity to myself and I go and kill somebody, an Aboriginal, it's called revenge killing. So if an Aboriginal attacks the white settlers and they then kill the Aborigines, under Aboriginal law, that's revenge killing. Why are you making a fuss? Oh, the people at the time aren't making the fuss. It's academics sitting in Newcastle who are putting words in their mouths and emotions in their heart that are saying it must have been like this or must have been like that. And they're speculating. They're nowhere near the truth of the matter.
Here's another one that I found. This is a guy called David Marr, who I didn't know anything about, but supposedly, well, apparently he writes in the monthly The Guardian and the Saturday paper, so that might tell you where his political leanings lie. But this is a clip of him discussing, I guess he just wrote a book and he was speaking to the Australia Institute.
There's been an argument for 40 or 50 years now that the problem was that we forgot the true history of Australia. I think that's too easy. What happened in Australia was the creation, an amazing creation of a fake history for the country. A fake history we could be proud of. And that fake history goes something like Cook, convicts, sheep, gold, Eureka Stockade, Gallipoli.
So he's making the point that our whole history has been fabricated. It's been fabricated to make us feel patriotic about Australia and warm and fuzzy and whatever. And Cook, the convicts, sheep, gold, Eureka Stockade, and Gallipoli are all fake. It's all fake. And what really were happening was these horrible massacres. This is the stuff that is getting around and being put into people's minds, especially our youth. That's what really upsets me. These poor kids sitting in the classroom who don't know any better. They're listening to their teacher, just looking up to this authority figure standing at the front of the classroom, supposedly giving them knowledge that they can then take and absorb. And they're feeding them this garbage. It's just rubbish.
Just because someone can hold up their hand and list off a number of topics, what's that? That's not history. And I don't as such, I don't know, I feel sort of strange about this word history. I'm the person who looks for details. I'm the person who looks for facts, relationships, analysis. And I'm the person that will look behind why things happen. So if you want to call that history, well, fair enough. But just for the chronologically listing dates and events, to me, so what? Okay, you've got a chronology, and just because you can systematically list 5 things out of 100 things that happened in that period. I mean, he missed Bligh, he missed the Rum Rebellion, he missed the Irish Rebellion, and what about MacArthur, Macquarie, the 200 churches? What about putting up the Sydney Hospital that became, the Parliament? I mean, just 5 things is nothing, is it? So to say we've got a false history, it sounds like he's got no idea what he's talking about, as far as I'm concerned. When you want to call that history. If you wanted to say where's the analysis, what happened, what were the consequences, you're much more likely to find yourself with an understanding of who and why and when. Now, when I do that, I am incredibly impressed with the Christian benevolence that was taking over the British world. The fact that there were so many people who had become Christians in England, and how that affected even the king writing and saying, all right, we're going to go out to this little place, on the other side of the earth, we're going to go to whatever we call New South Wales, of course. And what's happening is that there are all these natives down there, I suppose, we could do a treaty, but of course nobody rules the place, of course. I mean, they don't read and write, and they have no value. So, I mean, what are they going to think about, we're here to do a treaty. Would you like to do a treaty? How about 10, 10 commandments? We'll do 10 treaties. Well, of course, he said, well, we can't do any of that. It's a piece of nonsense to think about that. So what I'm going to do is I am going to benevolently make them all British subjects equal under the law. And you're going to care for my subjects. And that is my commandment, that you will care for my people, the natives of Australia. And that's what the governors set out to do. They had equal rights under the law. And I found cases up to Macquarie where Aborigines were allowed to take ship's captains to court and sue them because they had a right as a British subject to take somebody to court. So where's all that in the history sort of jumping around with Eureka Stockades? So we totally missed the incredible event of the British coming to this country. And the Aboriginal people, the natives, all I can say is, by God blessed, that it wasn't someone like the Romans or the French or the Spanish who would have just walked through and slaughtered everybody they came across. So, there's been an incredible blessing to this country. And we've overlooked the goodness that came here and quantifying argument, because it is a movement, as you've just sort of pointed out, to bring anarchy, to destroy the pride that we have in this incredible country. See, I said when I started this, I had a project. I was just out to find the truth. I was disgusted with the rubbish that I was reading as Australian history as we started to look at Wikipedia. See, it's the Santa Claus syndrome. If you tell yourself this rubbish often enough, the Santa Claus thing, you'll start to believe it. And I'd find things and I got upset. But by the time I finished this incredible book, let me take a minute and hold it up for people. By the time I finished this book, what a capital idea! Australia, 1770 to 1901, what a capital idea it was to come off to Australia. I found my sense of pride in this country up by 100%. This is a phenomenal country. I mean, what we have achieved without a revolution is just incredible. It's a shame of what's going on at the moment, I have to say, where even our Prime Minister can't even get an audience with the US President because they think, why would we want to talk to the leaders of Australia? We're in a shocking position internationally at the moment. But this country is absolutely a phenomenal place. And I just love the country and love the culture, and our history is just fantastic. And the sense of humor, I just wrote up, I sort of take a stack of, and Wentworth, he's had enough of this Wilberforce, this, was it Wentworth and Hobble? No, what was the guy that went down with Wentworth to Melbourne? Anyway, he's had enough of this right there. And the Murray River's in flood. And the guys challenged him and said, we need to bail out and go back to Sydney. And Wentworth spills the rest of his tea under the fire. And he grabs his mate, Jim, who's not, works for him. And he says, righto, Jim, it's time to get your hair wet. And they're going to jump into the flooded Murray River. And they get a rope. And he said, no, we're going to swim to the other side. And we're taking a rope with us. And he says to Jim, now you see that gum tree on the other side? Jim says, yes. He says, no, the other one. It was that incredible thing about the country, even as they taste, going to jump in and going to drown, It's just this amazing country that we would dare to do things and stand up. And what we see in Donald Trump, and we need here, is some blasted leadership. We need some leadership. Where is our vision for where this country could go? I remember a fella said to me last year, he said, listen, you're talking about history, and he said, Queensland is bigger than Europe. We haven't even started to develop this place yet. And I just went, he get the idea. We're so caught in the little domestics, and we've lost the sense. See, Arthur Phillip had a vision for this country. And when Macquarie came along, he picked it up and changed it to bring in prosperity. And he started this nation, and they believed in this country. Now, where are our leaders? They're certainly not in Wikipedia, who have any pride in this country. Any pride. Yes, there were skirmishes, and yes, there were many successes, and people who the Aborigines that got on the ships and went around the country with Flinders and went off to Mauritius and other places. You know, there was an incredible amount of integration. So just to pick on the downside, I mean, you could just say, oh, Australia's a horrible place. There's all sorts of horrible things go on every day. Well, you could believe that if you just watch 7 News, I suppose. But there's also so many successful, exciting, wonderful relationships and things that people do. And this is a great country, and it's a blasted shame that our youth can't hear about it. I'm really hoping that this book I'm writing now, called Leaders and Larrikins, Great Australian Stories, where I'm introducing you to the characters. I'm putting it into dialogue, like when we're saying we've made you, you know, we're going to swim across the river, it's time to get your hair wet. You're going to meet them. And I'm really hoping that the schools or something will just pick this up as they get to meet these great Australians who make up our history.
Look, this really is a story of humanity, and it's a story that you know, we have our positives and we have our negatives. Like, I can wake up 5 days out of 10 and do tremendous amounts of evil, but I can wake up the other 5 days and do tremendous amounts of good.
I'm glad to hear that, Stephen. I feel a lot better now that you can throw in 5 good days along with your bad ones. Keep going.
My point is, like, people are capable of doing a lot of good things, and sometimes they do bad things. And if you want to, you can look. If you're just focused on the negatives, you'll find them. If you're focused on the positives, you'll find them. I hear this argument that they say, oh, well, the British brought alcohol to the Aboriginals, and that completely ruined their society. But they also brought food and medicine and things and tremendous amounts of good as well.
Shelter and clothing. You see, the average, you know, you want to talk statistics looking backwards, and the business about, what do they say? It was so many tribes or something. We quoted me something earlier, and because it was totally fictitious how many people were in the country. Who knew how many Aborigines were here? Nobody knew. But when we look at the statistics of longevity in this country, the average lifespan of the Aboriginal was 35 years at the time that Phillip arrived. Within 20 years, it had gone up to 55. And infant mortality rate had dropped. You know, the infant mortality rate, I don't know, wasn't it? It was the murder rate. The murder rate among Aborigines was 3 times higher than the drug traffic trade in Honduras today. I mean, a phenomenal number of Aborigines murdered each other, and we're totally overlooking that. So why? So when you pick up, I started to read the business on massacres today that's in my book. And by the time I read a couple of pages, I had to say to myself, I could not have written a more balanced explanation and examination of what took place under that topic of massacres. So, you know, anyone that's afraid of the truth, don't read my book, because I venture in to have a level-headed examination of what took place in this country. And I can only say, as a person wrote to me this week and said, this is one of the best books I have read in my life. I should mention, I suppose, just because I'm really pleased, is that 2 weeks ago, I got a letter back from Buckingham Palace, and His Majesty wrote to me to thank me for his copy of the book.
Very, very good.
That's great, isn't it? That's going straight to the pool room, that is.
That's very good. But tell me a little bit about how when the British did arrive, you know, tell us more about the story of Governor Phillip and Bennelong, because this is kind of showcases how Phillip wanted to treat the Aboriginal people and wanted to have relations with them, and it was I mean, it's a great story, isn't it?
It is. It is a great story, because Bennelong could see when he had in the Aboriginal culture, there was no such thing as value. Life had no value. So you couldn't trade with them, you couldn't give a treaty, because there was no sense of value. And in the Aboriginal culture, he had never come across a thing called forgiveness. And he was totally in shock by the fact that Arthur Phillip said, you will not hurt this man, I'm forgiving him for what he has done in trying. He didn't know what he was doing, you know, it sounded like a bit like Jesus from the cross, really. They don't know what they're doing. And Bennelong was so taken with this act of forgiveness that he went away and talked to his people. He was only a young man and said, we're going to move in. And with the British, they've got a totally different perspective on the value of life and your life. Now, a year or so later, Bennelong had 2 wives, and he got on exceptionally well with Phillip. And he came to see him. The first, I think, which one, number 1 or 2 died, but she recently had a child. And he came to see Phillip, and he said, I want you, if you would you care for my child? Because you can do a better job in the colony than I can, trying to raise a child out under the lean-to and the rain and the suffering and the wind, it's likely to die. So Phillip said, of course, I'll look after your child. And at that point, Bennelong is so taken with him, he said, I'll get the child, but I'll be back in a little while. And Bennelong came back. He had a ceremony outside the tent or wherever Phillip was, the wooden government house. I think it was around the bridge, actually. And he had a little ceremony, and he made Phillip an Aboriginal by adoption and made him an elder, because he was already an elder with the British people, and he became an elder with the Aborigines and was given the name Wallawari. And it was a derivative of Bennelong's name as well, which is Wallawiri or some other derivative like that. And so the relationship was there. So Bennelong from that point on didn't call him governor or sir or hey you. He called him father, because he was his father and he cared for his children. And here's the bit that gets missing in that. When he became an elder for the Aborigines, he then became responsible for the welfare of that tribe as an elder with the Aborigines, as well as an elder for the British tribe. And it wasn't just a name, it was him assuming responsibility and the respect that he was due as an elder within the Aboriginal people. And we have totally missed this wonderful story of how a British man within 2 years had such, and it can only be Christian faith, benevolence and caring that the Aborigines had never seen before, that they wanted to become part of this Christian culture. And it's a misnomer not to realise that that's what it was in what was being expressed and what was being done.
But the significance of Bennelong calling Phillip father in Aboriginal kingship, is it kingship or kinship? That's a huge part of their culture, and calling someone father is like calling your own father. I mean, there's a huge significance that comes along with that.
Now, what's missing in that, and I don't understand a bit, when I actually had a look at the culture, how you had to have 2 totems, your mothers and your fathers, and all culture and his background, etc., who you were, relates to the dream time, the grandfathers, etc., that procreate. So it becomes an anti-Christian religion to suggest that the spirits of the dead created the earth. You've got to watch it, but that is what is being said. Procreators of all living things. That's not, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty. That is, I believe in all the spirits of the dead who created everything, So it's not a Christian religion. It's pantheism, that God's in everything. So, but at that point, yes, Phillip doesn't have the 2 totems. And yet, I imagine at that point, although it's not written, he may have been given, as it were, a totem, such as the Waratah or something. That was his totem. I don't think it was the kangaroo, because I ate so many kangaroos. But it would have been something like that. But yes, that little bit's not recorded as to if he was an elder and an Aborigine, what his totem may have been. But he was fully adopted, and I'm sure there would have been that act going on that's just not recorded in the diaries.
And tell us about as well British subjects. Now, for young people, they might see that and think of it as like a British slave. Like, if you're a subject, you're a slave. No, it wasn't. It was more than that. Like before the 1940s, when we had the Citizens Act. We were all British subjects. I mean, we became Australian citizens after that, but prior to that, everyone in the British Empire was a British subject. and it didn't mean you were a slave. That you mean that you were just British.
Oh.
So they basically said that the Aboriginal people were part of their society and they were equal among the rest of the British. Is that correct?
Oh, and rights, civil rights. It starts with the Magna Carta. That it won't be the king that is the tyrant for our world. We are living in a world where people have rights to the courts, to food, to shelter, to wealth, to prosperity. It was a whole range of things. To be a British subject, of course, was under the care of the king. There were things that would be done for your benefit. If someone hurt you, they were in trouble because you had rights as well as responsibilities as a British subject. And of course, as Britain progressed with its rights and voting rights and laws and orders, so did the laws in Australia and the rights of all of its citizens. As you just pointed out, up until 1947, is it 49, when we had the Citizenship Act, and we all became Australian citizens at that point. At that point, it actually says all British subjects, if you're coming from Britain and you weren't naturally born here, could automatically become also Australian citizens. So there was this sort of link. We're members of we were, and probably sort of in a somewhat funny way, we are still members of the British Empire. We now may call it the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth, but it's still that amazingly rich history of culture and sophistication that's gone on for hundreds of years. Here's something. A communist writer, a fellow writing a lot more of this Santa Claus syndrome stuff out of Melbourne, when he was writing his book that was sort of missing things and anti-Australian, he makes a slip, as far as I'm concerned, in the preface. And as he's just writing out the preface, he stops and says, if we deny our British heritage, we will become a people without a soul. And that is what is happening. We are losing our social consciousness, our psyche. As you pointed out, the young people, what does it mean to be an Australian? I'm a native Australian. I know it, I feel it, I am a native Australian. You can't take that away from me. That's my identity, that's my everything, my culture, whatever. And you can't take, but when the young people are actually having trouble now defining themselves as Australian because we've robbed them of this incredibly wonderful history. We are vulnerable, Stephen, to the onslaughts, the anarchistic attacks against us. We are vulnerable to losing our pride in this country and therefore our ability to define our future because we don't know our history. And I've written this book basically as an accident. This book was written to help us understand our history. And now it's a book that absolutely needs to be read.
I want to squeeze in a few more things before we finish off. I mean, I could talk to you about this all night, but we probably should cut it short at some point. But here's a clip from Tony Abbott talking about one of the massacres that happened, and then what happened afterwards. So this is the former prime minister.
This is the site of an absolutely atrocious massacre. The butchery and cold blood of some 28 Aboriginal men, women and children by a group of 12 mostly convict stockmen. A terrible blot on our history, but the story didn't end here. 11 of them were taken to Sydney by a heroic Attorney General, John Plunkett. They were put on trial. Eventually, 7 of them were found guilty and hanged for murder. So there was at least some measure of justice, even in those far-off days.
So I think he's telling an important story, and it goes to show that, bad things happen, and bad things happen, especially back in these times. I think you have to put ourselves in the context of this is not you can't view it through the lens of modern times. Like if you're out in Tamworth now, there's a couple of police stations on the corner where police can react to things. You know, Tamworth back in the 1800s could be completely different. You know, there might be no government police or military around for miles and miles and miles. So some of these people are out on these properties or out in the wilderness, and they're confronted by Aboriginal people, and some of these skirmishes, I'm sure, did happen. But the point of it was that the governors, the government in place, didn't want it to happen. They actually hang these people for crimes against their fellow British subjects, as we were just talking about.
I thought this is the Mile Creek massacre, mate. This is up here in Queensland.
Yeah. I know. I'm just saying Tamworth as an example, but yeah.
And when the owner was away of the land, and there were a group of Aboriginal people that were just there on his property, not a problem. But he was away, and the manager sort of turned a blind eye to this group of 12 who were what do you call them? Marauders? No, not marauders. I don't know what they were. Hill's Angels, I suppose, whatever other word you want to use for them. And there's a possibility that they killed other people before this one, and they're on horses. They came looking for this group of people. They went away and came back and found them, and then chased them. I think they'd left and they chased them, and as you pointed out, murdered them. Then it got worse because they went away and thought, oh, you know, we might get caught for this. You know, we can't trust the owner. And they came back and they cut up the bodies and buried them. And when the owner came back and found out, he rode, and I've been out past where it was, he rode some 500 miles to report the event to the Attorney General. You know, so there was, I mean, it wasn't just, oh, well, they'll just the booms. No. These were human beings, and they had rights to life, and he rode all the way in. And that's when they arrested those fellows. And Tony and I have talked about this particular event and how Pluckett, I think that's his name, just stuck with it. And the governor was behind him. I don't think who the governor was at the time. And they were out to just do something about this horrendous event. But here's the thing, that was a horrendous event that stood out. And as much as people want to say it was common, it wasn't. This was a tremendously awful event. And they did hang them. They didn't just slap them on the wrist and say, oh, well, you know, they hung them as they deserved to be hung for murder.
But I guess my big question is how difficult was it for the authorities in these early times to be able to control everything that was happening? How tightly controlled were things back then?
On both sides of the fence with this one, with people moving out and you know, wanting to set up farms, etc. You often hear, and maybe even denied in some of the stuff you were reading, that the whites were taking the lands and the water hole. Well, in actual fact, when I went and had a look, it was firstly the Aborigines discovered that corn was really quite nice, and they were growing crops of this stuff. But if you got up in the middle of the night to say, hey, what are you doing? Then, oh, well, that was the end of your life. You know, you had no value. And it wasn't until years later that the Aborigines discovered how nice mutton was too, you know, and land. So you see that it was actually the part of the whole necessity of survival, of sharing. You got food and we need food. You know, you can see the point of view that what was happening. Of course, the settler didn't see that because it was losing wealth. He was losing, you know, protection of his own family, etc. So there was conflict in terms of the two views of what this is about. No doubt about it. And people wanting to be squatters and moving out were also then putting themselves in danger to a very warring society that, yes, if you got in their way, your life had no value. Let's not deny that. But let's also realise that there was two sides of what was going on. And yes, with the spread of the settlement, civilization, whatever you want to call it, yes, there was going to be conflict, and also as they moved with the missions, etc., there came benevolence. And there's no denying that, if you said to people today, a Creole or full-blood Aborigine, well, would you like to go back and live in your primitive society? Well, that sounds good. Well, you've got to give up your phone, your house, your car, your electricity, your education, your healthcare, your welfare checks. Did I mention the welfare checks? Or you're going to lose all of that, and you just have to go on and be like a hippie and live in the trees. Now, how many sensible people, other than being a hippie, would say, "Oh, I'm up for that"? And I mean, even the hippies walk around, as it were, if you can find any these days, with their mobile phones. Nobody really wants to give up electricity and the luxuries of life, and they wouldn't either. So why on earth would you think that you want to not embrace all the incredible good things? And sure, people do resist change no matter where it is and when it happens. Those that have an investment in the current situation in any form of life, try bringing some change at the local church and see how successful that is, or any local club. People resist change, and yet in so many ways, change, of course, it can be beneficial, and it certainly was in Australia.
All right, let's just fast forward quickly before we finish up to modern times and current events. And this is the new Liberal Party leader, Susan Lee, speaking at the National Press Club this week. This is how she started her address.
Thank you for the warm welcome. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today.
So that's how she kicked off her speech. I mean, I guess my question to you, we're talking about younger generations being brainwashed by all this stuff. Do you think our politicians have been brainwashed as well?
Oh, definitely. I mean, fancy saying, I want to acknowledge the spirits and the demons of a race of people of centuries past who claim to be the procreators of the earth and deny and confront the Christian religion and Islam and Judaism and claim that they are the only way we understand the earth. But I want to acknowledge that whoever they were here on this land, so I'm told, centuries before. Well, why not say, I want to acknowledge all the wonderful, incredible people who have contributed to the benefit of us being able to live here peacefully and so prosperously in this country. What's the matter with acknowledging them? But why do we acknowledge people in the past anyway? What sort of Taoism is that? I mean, that's a Chinese thing, isn't it? Of Japanese of ancestor worship. Why are we worshipping in some sort of Taoist sort of religious basis that we've got to, in a service sort of thing? I want to acknowledge, etc., in a religious sort of form every time we have a meeting. So she's a hypocrite. A hypocrite to sort of say, I stand up for the values of Australia, and yet I don't really stand up for the values of Australia. I'm quite happy to fly different flags that aren't really national, and I'm quite happy to acknowledge people that were dead to some ancient religion.
And look, this stuff is starting to really wear thin on the Australian people. I think you're starting to hear the Welcome to Country getting booed at sporting events, which I think is terrible because it's a negative impact that goes then on the Aboriginal people. And a lot of the Aboriginal people out there are not calling for a welcome to country. It's just a virtue signalling class from the city elites that want this stuff. The everyday Aboriginal people out there living in rural and remote areas, they just want to get by and live their lives. They could care less about welcome to country.
But when did an Aborigine ever get together and say, before we sit down and have a drink or have a meal, let's all acknowledge the elders of the past? They don't do that. So why have we picked it up? And the welcome to country, we all know that Ernie Dingo made it up because he had a group of New Zealand actors, and he said, well, you welcomed us or some other thing to New Zealand and did your dance. Oh, well, let me welcome you, and I'm only a Creole Aboriginal myself, by the way. Let me welcome you to our country. Well, but I get exceptionally offended every time I take an airplane trip and they want to welcome me, a native Australian, to my own country. How disgraceful. I mean, who's the foreigner? Why treat me as if I don't have a passport and I don't have a history and I don't have a right to be here?
Mate, they do it on domestic flights. Domestic flights. It's ridiculous.
That's a domestic flight. I'm not even coming in from anywhere else as far away as Tasmania. I mean, New Zealand.
But this is from the Institute of Public Affairs, so a lot of people will probably say that this is biased. But this is a recent survey that they did where they asked people whether they're finding Welcome to Country, how they find Welcome to Country and whether they find it divisive or not. And basically, over 50% of people now do believe that it is divisive, with 56% of the total saying, or to the question, do you feel the Aboriginal Welcome to Country ceremonies have become divisive? As I said, 56 people say yes, they agree. 27% of people say they're unsure, and 17% of people say they disagree. So going by those statistics, it was only a poll based on 1,000 responses, but there is a growing resentment to this stuff out there. I feel
of course it is.
people are getting sick of it. Do you think it's time for Welcome to Country to see its end?
Yeah, but wait a minute. Where's the motivation behind it? Who brought this up? Where's the division? What party is also saying we love the Palestinians? We want to bring back. You see, I think we started with saying you only got down to 1% of the country is full-blood Aboriginal. I mean, how is it that we got a tail wagging the dog? Why all the rest of us as native Australians, which means that I was born here. This is my native country. Everybody comes from somewhere else. There are even the Aborigines, they may have been here for 5,000 years, as the DNA tests show, but they came in from India and somewhere else. Humans are not indigenous to this country. Plants and animals are, but humans are not. We didn't just come out of the ground or be something that is not. Aboriginal people have hearts and brains and legs and eyes and noses like every other human. They are not indigenous to this country. Plants and animals are. So why is it that just because you're born here, this existential moment of my life, is any human who is born here any more important than another because of the shade of their skin? I will not accept that.
All right, well, let's finish up by talking about your book. Now, people can head to reynoldslearning.com. That's your website, and if they click this link where it says Australian History, it will take you to the page where you can purchase the book. It looks like there's a big discount on it at the moment, $80 you can pick it up for. So I encourage everyone to head to reynoldslearning.com and get a copy of the book. I bought 3 copies, and I gave 2 as a present, and I kept 1 for myself. And get it out there and read the true history of Australia. I mean, you really went through the primary sources to write this book, didn't you? You're not relying on information from recent years.
You see, as you know, Stephen, I used to work for the US Senate. I'm the only Australian ever to work for the US Senate, and I didn't just work there. I wasn't a secretary. I was senior professional staff for the Senate Judiciary Committee underneath the Chief of Staff. And I worked very closely with the White House on a number of issues, including the President's Commission on Organised Crime, which all had to do with drugs coming in from Central America. So I was in the White House's monthly private briefings as an Australian. And so I got there, not because I'm related to anyone, I got there on the quality of my work. And so when I came to this business of Australian history, I came at it with the same sort of degree of integrity and professionalism as I would have written something for the White House. So you're picking up as good as it gets as far as I'm concerned, and it's this quality of work, as the fellow said this week, it's incredibly well written. If you forget any of what you've just said, all people have to remember and get on the website, they've only got to remember the title. What a capital idea. If you just put that into Google, it'll bring you to the site. And may I recommend that they watch the little video that's there in red print, watch the video and just get an overall of the book. And,
I have to ask you this question because I haven't had a chance to ask you this yet. Why did you call it What a Capital Idea? What does that mean?
Well, it's got a double meaning. And it comes from when I got into the actual lounge room, and I think it's something like October the 19th, Saturday, October the 19th in 1786. And I got into the lounge room of Prime Minister Pitt and the 5 men who met with him. Can I believe this? And I was there with them, and I read the conversation. And I've got this sort of thing, watch so much TV. I threw myself into the scene. and what was being discussed, and it's all there written in the letters pattern that come out. And one of them said, oh, well, we're going to have to do something about this slavery problem, I mean, Wilberforce and Wesley are not going to be happy with us if we do not do something about slavery. So we can't have slavery in the new colony. And another one said, well, money is the root of all evil. Well, we can't let them have money. It'll only lead to more theft and the problems that that have developed here in England. So give them land and give them food and tools, and if they take their families, give them more land, but don't give them any money. And as I listened to these lovely gentlemen saying, what about this, and I thought they're creating Australia's first hippie commune when you listen to them. And I could just hear one of them on the other side of the room say, oh, yes, what a capital idea. We'll all go off to Australia. And I thought, well, there's the title of the book, isn't it? What a capital idea. It's so terribly British. Well, what happened was, of course, further on, we were so rich, and we returned 3 times the wealth to Britain than even Canada. We were Britain's greatest commercial accident. And it became, what a capital money, what a capital idea. We've all made so much money out of this wonderful venture, initiated, what was the fellow's name? Arthur Phillip. What a good idea. So you can see that it's based upon the positive aspect instead of the negative. And I wanted a picture that people, especially in the gold rush, couldn't get here fast enough. And I looked around till I found a ship, and then I touched this up and drew this picture of the ship and the clouds, etc., and the sea. And it took me ages to do that, to clean it up. And I wanted just the excitement, and I wanted the Australian blue sky. I'm getting in the boat and I'm off to Australia, Mum. Bye. Or Sydney, call me. No, don't call me. So we missed the excitement of just what a fantastic idea it was to come to Australia.
No, it's excellent. And look, I know I've promoted books on the show before, and I promoted a lot of things, but I really do recommend that people go out and purchase this book, particularly if you've got kids or grandchildren. Get this in the hands of them so they can learn about their country and have pride in their country. It's so important that our young kids value where they live and how great this country is and how much it's achieved in such a small amount of time. I mean, I've talked about it before. Go and walk around the city and see all the great buildings and see the civilization that we've built in such a small period. I mean, it's really incredible what we've done here. So go get the book.
I've written it in a way, I don't know, it's only an accident, but I've developed a writing style, and I studied writing for years, and the style, eventually it's got to become you. But the sentences, if you pick up any sentence, there's a lot of simple sentences, so it's easy for teenagers or children even to read. They can read the single idea. And so in any paragraph, I might put in a conjunction so that you get a bit of rhythm to the dance. Is not just staccato, but you'll get the point, you'll get the date, you'll get the fact, and it'll move you along. And what's funny is it's got such a style that if I start reading it, I can't stop. And I laugh at myself to say, well, this is all right. And if the style is there that keeps you moving and you want to turn the page. But I thought that we also needed some illustrations. We need some headings, so you know what you're reading. But so I'll put in 300 pictures that have never been published like this before. And you can see the people and the places as you're coming through the book.
No, that's excellent. Now, one of the other things I realized that I'd forgotten to ask you is the most important part of commanding the narrative. I guess I got sidetracked the first time you were on, and that's build your own fantasy government. Now, Dr. Reynolds, you're in charge of the next Parliament of Australia, and you can choose 5 or 6 people, living or dead. They don't have to be politicians, but people that you think can really lead this country into the future. Mate, you're in charge. 5 or 6 people. Who do you choose?
What? I get to be the Prime Minister.
You can? Yes, you can.
No,
Yep.
I want to be president, mate. So I've got a bit of power. I mean,
Okay.
we'll get rid of this. We'll get rid of the power that's in the legislature. I think it's causing us a lot of trouble. So if I was president and I get to choose my executive to run the country,
That's
who
right.
would I choose? Definitely Malcolm Roberts, Jared
Rennick.
Without a doubt, there'd be two fellas that are there.
Hey, let's, before you go on, I mean, that you've just basically outlined the lineup for our next event, which is the Australians for Better Government Endless Horizons. I've called it Endless Horizons because it's about looking towards the future of this great nation. You've got the three of them there, yourself, Malcolm Roberts, and Jared Rennick.
And all of them have got the book, by the way. Tony Abbott, I put him on. That's 1, 2, 3. That's 3. I'm allowed 5.
5 or 6,
Peter Crossgrove as well, because of his military experience and certainly a person who's able to think things through and nut things out. And, he ums and ahs, but he'd come good. And there's a space for the wild card, someone I haven't picked yet. There'd be someone out there that's out of business, I think, rather than politics. We need that sort of ability to sort of make business decisions, someone who knows. And, somewhere in there's got to be, and I think the other fellows, once they, there needs to be a vision where we can take the country and how we get it done. So I want some, how are we going to get this done, people? I don't want bureaucrats. They drive me crazy with the regulations. We don't want a day on. I'm going to start calling the bureaucrats day-ons. And this is the word that means deontology, and this is the word for law or regulation, talking about our Latin, not Terra Nullius, but deons. And they're deontologists, and they cannot think outside of what the regulations say, and we will never progress with a deon in charge of a country.
Well said, mate. Well, look, thanks again for coming on. Look, again, 2 things. I encourage people to get the book, What a Capital Idea, and also join us on the Gold Coast on Sunday, August 3rd. You can head to australiansforbetter.com for your tickets. You just click on the link and it will take you through to the page to buy your tickets. It's only $20. I mean, I think that's pretty good to come and hear about the future of Australia and the vision that some of our speakers have for this country. And I think we have a tremendous amount of potential in this country, provided that we focus on the positives. Yes, you can acknowledge that bad things happened, but a tremendous amount of good has happened, and I think that's what has led to the society that we've got now. If we were built on bloodshed and massacres and all these things, we wouldn't have the society that we have now. So,
as a young woman used to say to me, that I get upset about something, and she'd say, "Are you finished?" She'd say, "Get over it." Get over it. Get on with the day. Stop looking at the past. Get over it. Start to build from this existential moment your future.
Well, look, I think the main point is that the people that are driving this narrative about massacres and inflating the figures and inventing history, like that woman said, they've got a political agenda behind it. Or whatever agenda there is an agenda behind it, whether it be a Marxist agenda or just bringing down our society and not having they want to bring down the pride in our society so that they can implement their crazy Marxist ideas or whatever it is. So we need to be conscious of that and push back against it.
See, here's the thing. See, with history, you don't just write it and say da 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 da. The big question is, so what? What is the consequences? What can we learn that influences where we're going? Now, that's the value of people who want to tell us about our history, our past. What can we learn? So let's say there were a terrible time in Queensland with Aborigines being, with the Chinese being eaten by the Aborigines or Aborigines being killed. Okay, let's just put that in and say, happen. What can we learn? Why did this happen? How do we learn from this to develop, design, create a better tomorrow? So these people that you're talking about are not helping us create a better tomorrow. They're not helping us lead this country towards a better tomorrow. And there is the problem.
No, you're exactly right. And it's probably a good way to finish things up. So again, Dr. Reynolds, thank you very much for coming on again. I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future, and I'm looking forward to our event on August 3rd to hear from you in person. It'll be a good opportunity to meet you in person. I'm looking very much forward to that. So if you're out there watching, get your tickets, come along. And also get a copy, as I said before, of Dr. Reynolds' book, What a Capital Idea. And head to the website, commandingthenarrative.com. Keep up to date with everything that we're doing and share this episode out. We really do rely on our audience. We love our audience for spreading our information out there. I think it is incredibly important that people hear these discussions and take a different view to the prevailing narrative that seems to be out there at the moment. But until next time, we'll see you then. And thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.
Good night, Steve.